This program is proudly brought to you by Vocus, Australia's leading specialist fibre and network solutions provider.
Hi, and welcome to The People Who Built Australia. I'm Ross Greenwood. In the past 6 weeks, we've explored everything from banking to mining. But none of that would ever have been possible had it not been for the heart, nerve and sinew of the farmers who endeavoured to grow a supply of food for all Australians. Now, of course, it was difficult to begin with, and with the challenge of drought, flood and fire, it doesn't seem to be that much easier for many people cultivating our agricultural industry today.
I suppose if we build Australia, the people we've got to look at are those who were in the missions, those who are on pastoral stations, and many of the agricultural industries were built on the back of Indigenous labour right throughout this nation. So our success with the wool, the wheat, often relied on Indigenous people. So the true heroes are those who did the tough stuff before us.
It would have been really tough for early Australians, right across the country, no matter who you're talking about. Look, the changes that I've seen through my farming career and off farm as well have been amazing. So you can probably see the old tractor in the background behind me. That's a tractor that my dad bought in the 50s, and that's the tractor that I started farming with through to what we have now is incredible. Auto steer and cabin comfort with air conditioning and auto height control, everything like that. It's been wonderful.
I think people in the city sometimes think we sit out there on hay bales with straw between our teeth for a couple of hours every afternoon. It's far from that. They are not just running state-of-the-art machinery. They are playing and hedging on international markets. They are business modelling, working through how they adapt to the amount of moisture they've got in the soil. How do they continue to keep moisture in the soil that will actually make them money? And so this is why we've just evolved faster than any other farming group in the world.
If you look at, for example, the uptake of technology, say, by our grains industry in Australia, it's a nice example of how technology has really revolutionised the way farming is conducted. Farmers can now be very precise about where and how much fertiliser they put on their paddocks, for example. They can automate many of their tasks. They can drive their tractors in straight lines using auto guidance. And livestock producers can also collect vast amounts of information about individual cows or sheep on their farms and use that to inform decisions around breeding, about when they might sell those animals, and also to track their health and disease status. So you're right, there's a real, particularly with digital technology, there's an emerging revolution there that makes farming a much more sophisticated undertaking now than it was, say, a generation ago.
We've had some trying times, and that's meant that farmers are innovators, but also adopters of new technology. They're obviously always looking at their margins. We don't subsidise our farmers to any great extent. In fact, of the 37 OECD countries in the world, there's only one that subsidises their farmers less than Australia. So we basically said to them, you're on your own, you've got to go out there and make a quid, you've got to do it efficiently, you've got to be able to compete, and they're doing it easily. Our agricultural production, despite fire, flood, drought, cyclone, at the start of this year, we thought it'd hit about $60 billion if we were lucky. At the end of this financial year, we will hit $66.3 billion. And so the story of that is just add some stuff from upstairs and off we go. And the science and technology drives that we actually preserve every drop of moisture. And we're able to convert it into a product that we can send around the world. And obviously we oversupply here for our population. So it's so important that we do it at a high quality level. We're not a bulk producer, we're a top end producer at a niche market.
Achieving such high-quality produce when up against the unrelenting forces of nature is no mean feat.
What we do know from Australian farming perspective is they're dealing with one of the most variable climates in the world for agriculture. So they're dealing with a really highly variable climate where it can be droughts one year, it can be flooding rains the next year, and they're continued to produce through that period. So they're continuing to be the most water use efficient on a kilogram of grain per millimetre of rain globally. So that would be the first fact. The second one, if we look at the way that Australian farmers operate with entire exposure to both that production risk, but also the market risk, because Australian farmers aren't subsidised by like a lot of their international competitors. So if we think around the OECD average for farmers across the globe is around 20% of their income comes from government support. In Australia, we are the lowest in the OECD, or from time to time, sort of backwards and forwards with New Zealand, but the lowest from level of government support. And in Australia, the more important thing about that number is the levels of support for Australian farmers from the government. They're not direct subsidies. They're things like investment in research and development. They're things like investment in some of the ways that Australian farmers can continue to innovate or better meet global markets. So if we think around their productivity, if we think around, their exposure to that market risk, they're global leaders. And then lastly, if we think about the product and the connectiveness to consumers, I think that's also that really important part of Australian farmers, that global recognition that in those markets, we can continue to receive that price premium because our international customers recognise that we have the right genetics, the right farming systems, the quality procedures in place, the right supply chains to deliver the highest quality, whether it's malt into the barley industry, whether it's high protein it could be the Japanese udon noodle market, for example, is a really great, innovative story about Australian grains, or it could be some of our pulse products, which are going to be, right across supermarket shelves for years to come in a whole lot of plant-based food products.
The entrepreneurs, the early entrepreneurs, many of whom might have been people on the land, building farms for the very first time, people building transport systems across the nation, people who were mining. And, of course, this is where the initial wealth for Australia, sort of, if you like, in its European settlement days, that's where it came from. And you again, underestimate the hardness of what those people had to endure to try and build these fortunes. And again, you think about just how tough it would be getting out there and staking a claim for a gold mine or an iron ore mine in the old days.
Absolutely, and raising the capital to get those products out to those big markets and having the foresight, seeing that opportunity and getting it out to those markets, that has underpinned the country for a long time. I think a lot of people forget just how innovative things like the Snowy Mountains scheme is. Now, that's a government scheme, obviously, but I think we forget that the big irrigation schemes that transformed irrigated agriculture, that transformed power consumption, these are all the big innovations and entrepreneurs that have built this country. And they did that thing. They took a risk. They saw an opportunity that no one else could. They organised. They pulled people together, and they stood by those risks they were taking.
Great risks have ultimately reaped great rewards for generations of Australian farmers.
We have come over the last couple of 100 years from feeding a small colony of recent arrivals into Australia right through to now. We're actually one of the most productive nations on a per capita basis globally.
Coming up, how our farmers will survive the challenges posed by climate change and economic coercion.
This program is brought to you by Meriton, Australia's apartment leader in quality and design for over 58 years. This program is brought to you by Fortescue Metals Group, empowering thriving communities, investing in the future.
Welcome back to The People Who Built Australia. Agriculture in Australia is worth around $155 billion to our economy and accounts for around 12% of GDP. Increasingly, it's under threat, not just from the elements, but from Chinese economic coercion. From beef to barley, lobster to wine, Sour grapes between China and Australia is having a major impact on our agricultural industry. Trade tariffs, bans and restrictions are hitting Australia's bottom line by billions of dollars every year. Now, new deals are offering some hope for Australian producers.
We're a nation of 26 million people. We produce enough food for 80 million. So if we don't engage, we don't trade with the world, then we don't need the number of farmers we got, and we don't need the regional communities that support them. Britain will be free trade agreement number 15, and that's important. It's also important to put into context, while we have had challenges with China with particular commodities, our agricultural trade exports continue to increase, and beef is a perfect example despite some suspension of some abattoirs. We actually did our China free trade agreement quota in beef last year in July, when we normally do it about October, November every year. So the demand for Australian product is still there. But what we're doing is giving the opportunity for diversification, spreading the risk and being able to send boats left and right if we've got a problem with one. And grain is another perfect example. Barley was also hit by China. We sent our first boatload into Mexico because of the TPP-11. We secured an extra 750,000 tonne agreement with Saudi Arabia, and we've got better agreements with Pakistan and Sri Lanka in being able to fumigate in transit and reduce the number, and the same with India. So this is just us. Our job's just to put the environment. We will never tell Australian exporters or farmers where they should export to. Our job is simply to give them the opportunity to make that decision and make sure they diversify and don't have market concentration, which we probably did move towards. But now we've got 14 other free trade agreements to actually to play with. We're now saying to the farmers, here's your opportunity.
If we do look at the impact that some of the decisions by the Chinese government over the last 12 months have had at the farm gate, they've absolutely had that massive impact. So when we saw the decisions and the introduction of tariffs on the Australian barley industry in early 2020, that immediately dropped the price of barley at the farm gate around $40 a tonne back to the farmer. So we did see that immediate impact. But it's really also important to remember that we do have a whole range of global opportunities for Australian grain, and we do have a really diversified, market structure for the way we sell our grains into the globe. So look, China was a really big market for Australia. We were selling, from a barley perspective, we sold the majority of our export barley into China, so it was about 60 to 70% of our barley went into that premium malt market into China, helping feed that growing global demand for and thirst for beer and spirits and high-end malt-based products. And so we really did, suffer some of that shock over the last 12 months. What we have done as an industry is continue to look at how we can make the most of continuing to service other markets in the meantime and grow new markets where we haven't sold barley before.
Once again, it's the quality of our produce that makes all the difference.
We've always aimed for quality in Australia, and we've got really good standards around regulations around chemicals and those type of things. They're well regulated, they're well tested. That quality thing helps us compete in the world market. You know, we've got some freight advantages going into Southeast Asia, and some challenges around going into certain countries. At the moment, the government's working to find new markets. We put some barley into Mexico this year, which was a first. Look, we're flexible with what we grow. Fortunate in the grains industry, we can change something and grow a different crop the next year. So whereas a horticultural enterprise or a tree crop enterprise, they can't change. They've got what they got, so vineyards or whatever. We deliberately grew less barley. We were locked in last year. We had our crop in before the tariffs came in. But yeah, we've deliberately grown less barley this year.
Looking to the future, our farmers' adoption of new technology is also giving them a competitive edge.
We do know that Australian farmers are the most innovative amongst the world and always take the opportunity to look ahead into the future and grasp those concepts of technology, grasp those concepts of farming systems and look at how they could do that even better. We do know that this challenge over the next coming decades will also be against the backdrop of an increasingly variable climate. We do know it's going to be hotter and drier in many parts of the country. So we do need to continue to look at the ways we can farm more efficiently and more effectively. So for farmers, that will be everything from looking at the genetics of the types of crops we're growing, so ensuring that we can not only get the best yield, but also the best quality product, whether it's the malt product to go into a beer-based product, or whether it's the right wheat variety that can make the best bread or the best cakes or the best noodles globally. So the genetics, then we sort of go right through to the farming systems and the way we farm in Australia. Australian farmers are global leaders in water use efficiency. So when we think about turning millimetres of rain into tonnes of grain, Australian farmers are the most efficient across the world, and they'll need to continue to do that into the future as well. So we do need to continue to look at the way we farm, the way we, manage the farming system, the way we put our crop in the ground, the way we care for it through the season, and then even the way we harvest it, to ensure that we can continue to be as efficient as possible and grow those quality crops.
At the CSIRO, science has a major role to play in ensuring consumers, both foreign and domestic, have a healthy appetite for Australian produce.
Australia produces enough food to feed around 3 times the Australian population. And of course, we export about 70% of what we grow, therefore. The huge opportunity for Australia is actually capturing the massive market that will be developing and is developing to our immediate north in Asia. We've got nearly half of humanity there at the moment, and that's only going to increase over time, and a huge middle class emerging that have different requirements for their food than what they've had in the past. So they're demanding more nutritious, more healthy, more diverse products in their diet, and that's a massive opportunity for Australian farmers and our industry to meet that opportunity. Australia will always have a role to help meet the global food demand, but we really are a small producer when it comes to the whole world stage, but nonetheless an important role to play in our Indo-Pacific region. I think from many consumers, particularly the millennial generation, in how, say, farm animals are being run on farms. So the animal welfare agenda is really important. The environmental impact of how food is grown is also of growing concern. Greenhouse gas emissions from those farming systems, the amount of water they use, the amount of nutrients they use. So the role that science can play here is helping to capture that information of how those food products are being produced and carry that information along the supply chain to the retailer and then the consumer, so that they can have some reassurance, some comfort that the products they're buying are in fact being farmed sustainably, both from a social point of view and an environmental point of view. And there's some fascinating technology that can help us do this. For example, fingerprinting of food products, looking at the unique signature that food carries with it in terms of the DNA in it or the chemical composition in it, can help us track back to where it was grown and how it was grown. It's an amazing technology, and we're actively working on that at the moment.
Sustainability is at the very heart of innovation at FutureFeed, where seaweed, oddly, is being used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
The discovery of the special properties of seaweed as a feed ingredient came about when a farmer noticed that the cattle that were in a paddock near the sea and eating seaweed were more productive and healthier than his other cattle. So he reached out to a friend of his, Dr. Rob Kinley, who's also a scientist. Dr. Kinley looked at the properties of the seaweed and found that it had about a 20% reduction in methane, which was good, but it launched a global quest to see if they could find a seaweed that was even better than this one. And Dr. Kinley joined up with CSIRO and worked with James Cook Uni, as well as Meat and Livestock Australia, and they screened over 30 different seaweeds. And one of those seaweeds was this Asparagopsis variety. At first, they didn't believe the results because they were so good, so they retested it and found that indeed the Asparagopsis led to an almost 100% reduction in methane. The seaweed has some actives in it that work inside the rumen, inside the cattle and sheep, to interrupt the formation of methane. And actually, when it does that, the feed that would normally go to the production of methane also leads to productivity increases. So you get two benefits. You get a reduction in methane, and you also get improvements in productivity, which is average daily weight gain. So certainly that's what we see. This is a solution that's backed up by science with huge reductions in methane. Livestock contribute mere 60% of methane in agriculture, and this is a simple solution that cuts the methane by over 80%. So it's a simple, natural solution, and we're very proud and excited to be part of that. This is a seaweed that is grown naturally here in Australia. It's a technology owned by our university and research institute in Australia, so it's an Australian technology that we're rolling out globally. So there was a study that was carried out that showed that if 10% of all of our feedlots were fed Asparagopsis, it would have no impact on the greenhouse gas emissions. We project that if we are able to produce 4,500 tonnes of Asparagopsis in the next few years, which is part of the seaweed blueprint, then we'd effectively remove about 60,000 cars off the road in Australia. And you can just scale that. So as we scale Asparagopsis production, we can lead to taking millions of cars off the road globally. It's very exciting, and to be part of a new industry is equally as exciting. This is a whole new industry for us in Australia, and I can't emphasise that enough. We will see the increase in jobs over the next 5 years and going forward. We're growing a whole new industry, and in doing so, we're reducing methane emissions. So it's a very exciting role.
One day, I think many livestock producers in Australia and indeed around the world will not need to have post and wire fences on their farms. Instead, they will have collars around their livestock that will be connected to a satellite and the internet, and that collar will direct the animal where it can go on the farm. Through the use of a mild electric shock that the collar transmits to the animal and warns it where it's approaching an invisible barrier that's been defined using GPS. So those animals learn very quickly about where that barrier exists, within minutes often, and will stay within the virtual fence. And of course, that virtual fence can be moved at will so that you can direct the animals where they are on the farm. You can herd them up. You can separate animals that might be fighting with each other. You can put males and females together that you want to mate. It's a truly amazing technology, and most livestock producers I know are unbelievably excited about it, and they can't wait to see it being made more cheaply available to them.
In a boost to regional Australia, working on improving sustainability outcomes is providing even more employment opportunities.
So these are the sort of the investments in technology that have just transformed on the farm. But each one of them are important, and who knows what the next one will be. And I hope that it'll be here in Australia. And that's my next thing, is to try and make innovation, agricultural innovation, the next pillar of agriculture, where there's new jobs, the new jobs of ag, of bringing our young people home, not just on the land, but out in the regions, with doing that technology and innovation so that our farmers will adopt it like that.
Look, it's a great lifestyle. It's not just a lifestyle anymore, though, but it's a genuine business, and you know, some of the technology involved that is there is great. You know, my youngest son, he went off to Marcus Oldham College in Geelong and did an agribusiness degree. So bringing that business insight into our farm business has been really useful as well. So yeah, no, look, people are being encouraged to go into ag degrees at university, and we're seeing city kids do that. Absolute opportunity. And there's so many roles in agriculture, you know, from banking through to research in a lab to agronomy to, you know, there's just so many different roles and opportunities for young people to be involved in agriculture today.
Well, that's the end of our series. Thanks to you and also our partners, Fortescue Metals, the Commonwealth Bank, Meriton, Vocus, and of course, all of you who have watched at home. Because in one way or another, we are all the people who built Australia.
The People Who Built Australia, brought to you by CommBank. Because we live here. Can lives here.